As I read the following, I want you to sort of visually correct the things so you get a really idea of what one would see. One newspaper accounted, its floor is covered with a carpet of deep emerald, which has a soothing effect of turf under your feet. It is furnished with sofas and divans of a rich purple maroon, and the walls are hung with soft cloth of the same hue. At the end of the gallery, beneath a sweeping drapery, within a massive frame of dark, gorgeously carved wood, glitter the scintillant icebergs, and gleams freezing as it flows far out to Arctic solitudes, the emerald and azure ocean of the north. Such a picture was never painted before in this or any other country. It is not a picture. It is a sublime fact. You forget the gallery, the ostentatious frame, to sell out unawares into one of God's primeval solitudes. And another paper reported, through the carved woodwork, as through an open window, we looked at once, nearly 2,000 miles away to Labrador. Next slide. And in spite of all of those really great reviews, Church had a problem. The Iceberg, as the previous two paintings, had been painted on speculation with the hope that someone would purchase them. And both Niagara and the heart of the Andes had been snapped up. But the Icebergs, debuting just at the beginning of the Civil War, basically was born into a more cautious sort of financial market, and people were not so quick to step up to purchase the painting, which reportedly he was hoping to get $10,000 for, in which he had already gotten for the Heart of the Andes, a few years before. And so he had this thing hanging around his studio, on his 10th Street studio in New York, and taking up space. He had to move on to his next great project. And what was he to do? And so his agent helped him to get a spot in Boston the following year. So 1 year later, we find him in May of 1862 in Boston, showing again the north, a picture of icebergs. And it too, again, garnered great reviews, but no buyers. And so Church started to think, well, I've had luck in England before. My pictures were well reviewed there, and he'd had some sales to England, so he decided to go there. Next slide, please. But before he could do that, again, with his finger on the pulse of the public, and this time the British public, he realized he needed a new title, fearing that the British, who were sympathetic to the Confederacy because of their textile interests, he was afraid that they might basically see some sort of political connection between the name of the North and the painting, and that could somehow undercut the sale of the painting. So he decides to change the title back to the Icebergs. But there was also a compositional change, and please, next slide. And that's this, the mast in the foreground. Because he knew that the British, and particularly at this time period, just on the heels of the discovery of Franklin's lost voyage, or at least some of his men's remains, etc., and conclusive evidence that the expedition had perished, he slips this mast into the foreground, and probably feels in some ways that that particular thing will be, in a sense, a real sort of symbolic trigger to many of the British public about the Franklin expedition. And he was really quite right. Next slide, please. And here we have in London, the summer of 1863, his Icebergs now will be shown at the German Gallery, which is where he had shown the Heart of the Andes a couple of years before. And so the opening was attended by no less than Lady Franklin herself, as well as Leopold, now an Admiral McClintock, who had helped discover the remains of some of the remains of the expedition in 1859, and there were all these other commodores and explorers, and so basically it was received in the manner in which he anticipated, but still no buyers, which was sort of very frustrating to him. But next slide, please. In 1864, fortunately, it was decided that this really great engraving company and chromolithography company would do a chromolithograph of the painting. And here it is, featured on the cover of this book from 1966 by David Huntington. And this was a good thing because it would help later, or at least Huntington hoped it would help, to flush the icebergs out of the woodwork because no one knew where it was. Essentially, after the show closed, I should back up, but after the show closed in London and the cutting of this, the creation of this wonderful chromolithograph, the painting was purchased, but no one knew by whom. And the painting disappeared in the early 1860s, and it would remain such for over a century.